Andrew Chubb doing a fabulous PhD at the University of Western Australia. Some new data, he hasn't published this yet, but he has spent a very long time counting incidents in the South China Sea and increasing levels of assertiveness, and he divides them into three types: declarative, saying something; demonstrative, sailing somewhere; coercive, bashing into something. This doesn't mean that, what it means is changes. So if things go up and stay the same, they're not mentioned in subsequent years. So this is a kind of something new that happened that didn't happen the year before. And of course what you see is in general a rising process of assertiveness, however that's defined, and the red are things that we can worry about, where people actually died, or in the case of 1974, for example, or 1988, or where there were physical confrontations. And the simple picture is that things have become more confrontational, going way, way back. But it's been episodic. It hasn't been a continuous rise. There have been particular incidents at particular rises of assertiveness, of coercion at particular times. If anything, you'll notice there's actually been a slight drop-off. I mean, the figures, he hasn't got figures for this year, but apart from building extraordinarily large islands, I would argue there's actually been a reduction in some of the assertiveness in terms of there have been fewer clashes as far as we know. But that obviously has come, and it's part of the report you were referring to, the Lowy Institute, about, what was it called, passive assertiveness now, I think. Now, in a previous life, I looked more at the Middle East, and I used to occasionally attend gatherings where people would sort of talk about law and show how, the Palestinians would show how law was always on their side. Well, it hasn't really worked out for them having the law on their side. So law is important, but it's not everything. I'm reminded of, I don't know if you know the book by Doug Henwood on Wall Street. It's a Marxist analysis of Wall Street. And he describes how he used to work for a bank, and one day he got in a lift and there was a policeman in the lift. And he sort of suddenly realized, a little light bulb came on him, that everything he was doing, all the regulations, all the compliance, everything came down to the gun on the hip of the policeman in the lift. If you don't have coercion, some form of coercion, then law isn't worth it. We're supposed to be living in a rules-based order, and stability, it was a phrase we've heard a few times these past couple of days, is about keeping things as they are. And if China wants to change things, then that inevitably means instability. Now, is the law a framework? Is it a mandate? Is it a prohibition on certain activities? Or is it merely a tactic? And I think we have two visions, or two versions of what law is at stake in the South China Sea at the moment. Now, great powers don't need to follow rules. Nobody can tell a great power, really, what to do. So I suppose it tells us something about changes in the international order when a great power insists on rules. Because if they wanted to, they could do what they liked. But if there's a sense that there's a transition coming, then it's in the interest of the great power and people who support the current rules and current order to make sure that those rules are fixed in place for the foreseeable future while it's still possible. Keep the international system intact. Now, China was fully involved in the UNCLOS talks, right from the very beginning, I believe. It took over the UN seat in 1973, that's when the UNCLOS talks began. So this should be the kind of international law that China should fully uphold. And it's ironic, I think, that it's reverting to the imperialist version of international law, historic title, this kind of stuff, to try to subvert the modern kind of international law, UNCLOS, that's been agreed in the post-Second World War era. Now, I think China isn't likely to revise its school textbooks in terms of its historical view of who claimed what first in the South China Sea, and nor are the strategic imperatives that Karl and General Schaefer spoke about yesterday going to go away. So China, I think, is going to continue to push for whatever it can get. I hate the use of poor old Mr. Thucydides in the South China Sea, but I think one of his quotes was the powerful do what they can and the less powerful suffer what they must. Well, is that to be the fate of East and Southeast Asia? China has its own view of what is right for a regional arrangement of power in East and Southeast Asia, and it's not a view that's shared by its neighbours. So that leaves us, I think, with three options. We can either have an Asian Yalta, where the world is carved up again into spheres of influence. We can have a war, or there has to be pushback. And pushback requires a constant jockeying, constant bashing of ships into one another, constant dialogue, overt and private. And that, I think, is the only alternative to the other two outcomes, neither of which is in the interests of the region.